second in our series, free webinars, and it's super exciting to have us all here today to talk about these issues. So thank you for joining me. And just as we start, I do want to just acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands from which we're speaking today. So in Australia, we have this tradition to acknowledge really that the lands were never ceded, but we acknowledge traditional owners and the custodians of the lands of where we're meeting today. So and we pay our respects to their ancestors and descendants who continue the cultural and spiritual connections to country. So my name is Caroline Knights, and I'm a senior lecturer here at the University of Queensland Business School. Also one of the co-editors of our book. So just before we get started, I thought I'd give you a little intro to our book. So we've just super excited to have published this book with some of our co-authors here and last year. And this book is authored by, has chapters involving 49 global experts in work design across 25 chapters. So lots and lots of topics, such as work design for performance and well-being. We've got interesting chapters on AI and future work, playful work design, which is one of our first webinars, top-down work redesign, lots of things there. So something for everyone, basically. And obviously today we're talking about identity and personality, which are two other chapters as well in our book. So just to introduce who the editors and co-editors are, the editor is Professor Sharon Parker, ARC Laureate Fellow as well, and Director of the Centre for Transformative Work Design at Curtin University. And then we have the three of us co-editors. We've got Associate Professor Florian Flonek from Deakin University, Dr. Fang Zhang from also from the CCWD, and myself as well. So we are there so I'm delighted to being able to meet with some of you online across this webinar series. So today, who do we have? We've got some great lineup of speakers for you. We've got Dr. Chia-Huei, who's a professor at King's Business School, King's College in London. He focuses on person-environment dynamics. You obviously can read his bio there, but we're going to hear obviously more about the personality side of how work design might shape personality, which is still quite an emerging area today. There's lots of fantastic work on that. Be hearing from him as well as Lena. So Dr. Lena Wang is a professor in management at La Trobe University, Australia, and focuses on understanding and developing individual personality and fostering employee proactive behaviors and promoting diversity inclusion organizations. It's lovely to reconnect with you again, Lena. And yeah, super keen to hear what you have to say, I guess, on the personality topic. And then we've got Dr. Chia-Huei as well, who is a professor in people and organization. And I don't know how to say IESEG, so that's all I will say. The School of Management. And she focuses on how to help people thrive at work, looking at redesign, identity, and talent management. And also, you came to visit the CWD when I was still working there as well, which was fun way to connect, and it's lovely to be able to reconnect with you again. So thank you. So next, just while we're here, and to get you excited for the future, we have another webinar coming up in around a month's time called Beyond the Individual, Understanding the Forces Shaping Work Design. And this is going to talk about all the antecedents of work design, so things which drive and shape work design. So a super interesting one with David Holman, Irene DePater, Daniela Andre, and also a Florian moderating that one. So I believe the registration link will be popped in the chat at some point. So do feel free to sign up to that as well. All right. I feel like I've done way too much talking now. So I think I will let Chia-Huei and Lena take it off with their presentation first, and then we'll go to Chia-Huei's presentation, and then we'll open it out to Q&A as well. So I will stop sharing and let you share, Chia-Huei, and we can take it from there.
Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. And today I'm delighted to share the chapter that I wrote with Lena. So our presentation is mainly to provide the gist of the chapter and provide the main findings that we reviewed in this chapter. And hopefully that we can give you a flavor of what's the chapter about and the big ideas that we want to come across in this chapter. Okay, so our topic for today is the work design and the personality change. So we were actually talking, thinking about like how we can study how the work environments shape individuals' personality over time. Uh, Right. So traditionally, when we are talking about personality, we usually assume personality is static. It's something that's very enduring, that cannot be changed. And this idea is actually was proposed and is very popular in the past 100 or 20 years, 100 or 200 years. And then that idea has been applied significantly in the work setting. So, as you probably can see that most of time that we use personality as an assessment test, and we assume that if we can select the individuals who have a certain personality trait, then we are more likely to enjoy their behavior corresponding to that trait in the organization. So that's usually the ideas that we have. But nowadays, then personality scholars, they change their views, and this view to me, I think is more in line with our life experiences, because now we see more and more findings and also personal experiences about how the personality actually can change over time. We usually think that personality changed often in the childhood, but actually more findings suggest that personality also changed in adulthood. And one of the most significant force driving personality change is work experiences. And this is how that we want to introduce these ideas into this chapter and focus on the evidence supporting the idea that work environments can actually drive personality change over years. So which means that personality is malleable and it actually can be driven by the different work experiences and also environments. So how it work? So actually it's the psychologists and the sociologists, they have a different views about how it works. But then these two perspectives are actually talking about the same thing. There are many studies suggest that the work environment bring these situational demands that drive individuals' behavior, thinking, and then feelings. And these kind of changes will be consolidated over time. So basically, these two ideas are quite similar, but they just address the different aspects of the mechanism. So let's start to look at the psychology mechanism. So the psychologists, they suggest that the working environment actually bring in the role to the individual. So from the role-taking perspective, when individuals take a specific role that they need to perform a certain behavior, they need to think how to do their job in a certain way. And then when they do this over time, they become more habituated. And then after that, because of this behavior was reinforced by the reward and also the structure and the feedback in the environment. So sort of that can reinforce the consolidations of this set of the behavior and the thinkings of the individual who take the role. So then you can see the psychologists that mainly talking about like how the role taking actually can drive the personality changes at work. At work. And the sociologists, they provide different view, but their view is mainly come from the structural perspective. So what they were thinking is like is a social structure in a society. It actually provides the um, 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 overarching structures for how the individual should behave in this social structural design. And then because these different structures, they actually require the individuals to perform the different behavior to to align with the expectations of the role and the expectation of the society, what that impose the expectation to the role, and then therefore that reinforces individuals to engage with the specific patterns of feelings and the behaviors, then that drive the personality change. So as I mentioned, these two perspectives is actually quite similar in terms of that how they drive a personality change. But then psychologists are mainly focusing on how the individuals can operate this at the individual level. And then sociologists, they focus on how the broad social structure actually can drive the overall change and in these individual levels, the mechanism. So overall, this is the foundations, theoretical foundations about why personality can change and why the work environment can drive the change. And then let me go into deeper to give you some results about how and what kind of aspects of work that can influence personality change. And here we will talk about three aspects. The first one is the vocational characteristics, which is about occupation. The occupation that we choose can shape our personality. And the second source is the tasks characteristics, which is about the tasks that we perform daily. So this is a daily task characteristics can also be a source that drive personality change. And then the third part is the relational characteristics at work. So which is about the person that we work with at work. They can also provide the source that drive individuals to change their personality. So I'm going to review the results from these three aspects. Okay, in terms of a vocational characteristics, then we can think about occupation at the occupational level. And then you can start to think about your current job or your current occupation, and you may find that some occupation they reinforce a certain specific behavior and thinking patterns that drive personality change. So for example, for people who have the role or occupation which focusing on how to interaction with others and become the presenters, and then this type of occupation that drive the extroversions. And then using another example, if you can think about like the work that academics are doing and or maybe the R&D work, this type of occupations, they are sort of rely on a lot of thinking and investigations. And the study shows that for people who working in these occupations, they increase their openness over time. And on the slides, there are also another two types of occupations that can drive different personalities. So then you can see at an occupational level, then we have evidence suggesting that different occupation that can actually drive a personality change in different ways. Okay. And then not only about occupation, but you can also think about even we have the same occupation, we actually do our jobs very different on a day basis. So this is how some of the scholars they focus on the task characteristics, because many they want to understand that what we are doing on a day basis can actually change our personality over time. And then the most of studies consistently shows that when the jobs they have a higher autonomy or higher complexity, then these type of jobs, those or these type of tasks, that can actually enhance individual's sense of agency. And then when we say the sense of agency, it's mainly about whether the individual feel like they can control over the events in their life, or whether they will become more proactive. And of course, then we will say initially this enriched job content will actually drive individuals' agency in terms of their behavior. But then think about that if you do this over years, then people will start to think about, oh, being agent is really part of myself, and then therefore that's why we observe the findings that over years, these enriched jobs actually drive individuals' proactive personality and the locus of controls over years. And so far, I only share that, okay, positive work environment drive positive change. But then, of course, negative environment can also drive negative change. And this is the findings about the job demand, the stresses. So there are several studies showing that if individuals have a higher job stressors, they are more likely to become more neurotic, and they are more likely to reduce their conscientiousness, agreeableness, and these are the findings observed across different studies using different timeline and different samples. So then you can obviously see that the the job stressors can actually become the impeditors, which is actually undermines the personality change towards the positive directions. Uh, okay, and then finally, this is about the relational characteristics. Intuitively, we will assume that the people we working with can actually change our personality over time because you can see, we are as a human, we are likely to internalize the other people's expectation on us, and then therefore that might be a one mechanism explaining why people can change their personality depending on who they work with. And another mechanism is at the group level. So people are more likely to select the environment they feel comfortable with. And over time, when they found that they can work with the group nicely, they will stay. And people that cannot work with the group nicely, they will leave, right? So then this attraction selection mechanism is also alternative explanations about why the people at work can actually become the drive of the personality change. Yeah. However, although we have this really sounding theoretical foundation to explain why other people can drive personality change, the current findings didn't have a lot of evidence supporting this idea so far. And there are a lot of explanation why there's a gap there. But then I just want to leave this here and to give you a message like we sort of thinking like relational characteristics can also be a factor, but then so far the evidence is not enough to make a conclusions. Yep. Okay, now I'm going to pass this presentation to Lena. She will introduce the different ideas that we also covered in this chapter.
Thank you so much, Chia-Huei, and hello, everyone. Lena Wang joining from Melbourne, Australia. So I'd like to acknowledge Wurundjeri people as the traditional owners of the lands that I'm joining today. Thank you so much, Chia-Huei, for the great summary about how work shapes who we are. And in a way, what Chia-Huei has presented is a bit of a traditional view that our jobs are created by managers and by organizations. And accordingly, we sort of not passively, but we're responding to the kind of the way jobs have been created for us. But what we are also seeing increasingly is probably a more proactive view towards that, in a way that we as individuals, we can shape how our job looks like. You probably have heard of the concept of job crafting, which is really talking about how we actively shape and mold the job in a way that aligns with our interests and our strengths and what we want to pursue. So that view is in line with what we are calling relational personality change, in a way that personality change has been really driven by the individual. We apply our agency, we apply our intention, our purpose into this change process. Next slide, please, Chia-Huei, if you don't mind. And the process of this happening is really a few different pathways. The first one is where we craft our job that in line with our strengths. So Chia-Huei gave an example earlier, someone who is a good presenter or choose to be a presenter, may be crafting their job so that they engage more and more into those activities. And accordingly, by doing that, we develop a sense of competence because we know we're really good and we feel very good about ourselves. And we know from research that sense of competence is often part of conscientiousness. So this pathway facilitates us developing into more conscientious individuals. But there's also a different pathway where we craft our jobs for our interest. And thinking of someone who is very open-minded, is getting very bored with boring jobs, looking out for opportunities to do innovative and noble projects, little projects in their work. And as a result, we are further deepening our current trait of openness to experience. So that is that reinforcement process happening, where we first select a job that fits us, and then the job further reinforce our existing traits. And that's what we call as a co-responsive principle in the personality change theory. So just to quickly sum up what we have presented so far, the key takeaway message. The first one is we hope we have convinced you that personality is really not that fixed. Even during our adulthood, it's very malleable, and work is often a primary source or drivers of our personality change in adulthood. And the second point is, as Jeremy presented, there are several different layers or drivers of personality change at work. So we are shaped by our own vocational choice. We're shaped by the way tasks has been structured or configured for us, and we're shaped by those relational and social interactions we have with our colleagues and our supervisors at work. The third point is really talking about the direction of personality change. So as Chia-Huei mentioned, the good work design really shape our personality change into more positive direction. And we often call that maturation, because as we grow, as we mature, our personality should grow also in a towards better maturation kind of direction, which means we get a better sense of control. We perhaps become less neurotic as we get older. So good work design really facilitates us towards those positive developments. On the other hand, stressful, demanding, highly demanding jobs would kind of take us a step back in that maturation journey. And the last point is really what we mentioned about the volitional, the agency, agentic process of personality change. So we are not just passively responding to the way our jobs have been designed for us, but we can really personally drive how we want to become, who we want to become, and how that looks like for us over time. And finally, we just want to end this message by highlighting the organization's kind of corporate social responsibility view for the organizations, because people spend such a big part of their life at work. So organizations do have that responsibility to help foster positive and holistic personality development. And the good news for managers is that there's really no trade-off. Good work design helps develop more engaged, more motivated workforce, helps with people's mental health and well-being. And at the same time, they also positively develops who we are as individuals. So there's no hard job for managers to choose between the different options. It's really the synergy we are seeing in terms of how work changes who we are. So I will just end there and pass back on to Caroline, please.
Thank you very much, Chia-Huei and Lena. That was a fantastic presentation. We're going to jump straight into Giovanni's presentation on identity, and then we'll take some questions. I can see there's one in the chat, but do feel free to pop any questions in the chat as we go through. All right, I'll leave it with you, Giovanni.
Yes, thank you, Caroline. Just starting the slides. Okay, you can see the slides. So building on what Chia-Huei and Lena presented, this part of the presentation will zoom in on work design and identity. My name is Giovanni de Pook. I'm a professor at the ESSEC School of Management, which is in France, so coming to you from France. And this is work that we basically wrote together with Marius George from ESSEC Business School and Osrine from KU Leuven. Now to start, let me just start with identifying what is identity. So identity is basically the answer to the question, who am I? It is a narrative, it is a story that we construct about ourselves that is influenced by our characteristics such as personality, but also our values and importantly, the social roles and memberships we take in this world. What is important to know about identity is that it's not just one narrative. It's not just one simple answer to this question, who am I? Typically, people hold multiple identities that situate across different domains. For example, looking at myself, I have identities located in the work domain, so that I identify, for example, as an academic or a teacher or a member of my school. But I also have identities that go beyond that work domain or situated in the private domain. For example, I volunteer in my spare time, but I also identify as a Belgian citizen and as a woman. So it's complex, it's not just one identity, and these identities can be connected. For example, the fact that I identify as a woman can impact how I view myself as an academic and vice versa. What is also important that in this hierarchy of identities, identities differ in terms of importance. We call this salience. So the more salient an identity is in your mind, the more it tends to guide your decisions and your behavior because you think it is more important, it's more defining who you are. So in my case, there could be some of these identities that are more important than others. And finally, and this relates to what Chia-Huei and Lina said, identity is also not something that is fixed. You're actually not born with an identity. As I said, it's a narrative, it's a story. That's something that evolves over time. And it's typically shaped by new experiences, career transitions, or major life events. So we see that identity is not fixed, but at the same time, it's also not easy to change. So it's not something that will change on a day-to-day basis. It can change, but that takes time. So that on the side of identity, what then is work design? So we follow the classic definition of the content and organization of one's work tasks, relationships, and activities. And to structure our chapter, we used the Morgenstern and Humphrey framework, who distinguish between 4 types of characteristics. So they identify task characteristic. This has to do with the range and the nature of your tasks. Typical characteristics here are task variety, so how many different type of tasks do you do, and decision-making autonomy. We also look at knowledge characteristics, so all characteristics that influence the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are needed to perform a certain job successfully. Characteristics that are relevant here are, for example, job complexity or the amount of specialization. Then we look at social characteristics. This has to do with interactions at work and how you influence and are influenced by others. Typical characteristics here are supervisor support and the quality of relationships with colleagues, for example. And then finally, contextual characteristics have to do with the physical environment at work. And here we look, for example, at working conditions or physical demands in one's job. Now, there's 3 key questions that we already flagged in the invitation of this seminar that I want to answer with you based on the chapter. The first is, does work design shape identity, or is it the other way around? The second, which work characteristics are important? And the third, can we influence the relationship between work design and identity? So I will unpack that throughout this presentation. But overall, what is important to keep in mind is also the kind of research we have today, specifically for the first 2 questions, that the answer to those questions will be determined by what is known in the research. So I want to flag this already. So to be honest, there is not that much research specifically focusing on work design and identity already. And the research that we have will primarily focus on work identity. So not a lot of research on non-work identities. Typically, the focus is on organizational identity. So do people identify with their organization, or occupational identity? Then what is also important is that most research has kind of a directional bias and studies work design as an antecedent of identity. So predicting identity, looking at how work design and the job changes people's view of themselves. There's less research the other way around. And then finally, we also see that there is a particular focus in this research mainly on task characteristics and social characteristics. So relatively less focus on these knowledge and contextual dimensions, but that does not mean that they are not important. It just means that they have been less researched. Now, zooming in, I will discuss briefly a couple of studies. Of course, you can find more details and more information in the actual chapter. So when we look at how work design shapes how we see ourselves, how we identify ourselves, we see that task characteristics can have positive impact. So overall, we see that what is typically seen as a good work design, so high task variety, high autonomy, makes the work identity more important to people. So people identify more with their work when they have good work design. One study, for example, also shows how high autonomy and high job feedback allow people to realize their future work self. So the person they desire to become at work is basically facilitated by good work design, and this increases their perceived work meaningfulness. On the negative side, we also see that work design can harm identity. One study here by Sweet et al., for example, shows that class 16 poor work design, meaning low task variety and lower job autonomy, could explain to some extent why careers were less important to women compared to men in particular countries. So we see that again, people who have this good work design in terms of task characteristics identify more with work than people who don't. And another interesting study by Sever and colleagues actually showed that when people are assigned illegitimate tasks, so tasks that they perceive are outside of their role or unnecessary, that it can feel like an attack on their professional identity, causing resentment and stress. And to give an example, for example, we can look at care workers who have as a prime responsibility to support, for example, older people living independently. Well, when we give them tasks that are mainly cleaning tasks or, for example, becoming the personal chef of somebody, but not really aiding a person to live independently, this can be seen as a threat to their professional identity. And then on the social characteristics side, also an interesting study where we actually see that social characteristics, and in this case it was positive interactions with clients, can actually compensate for poorer work design on other aspects. So here they looked at accounting professionals in the US who didn't yet have their certification and were employed as seasonal workers in large tax preparation companies, multinational companies, and typically assigned routine work, low paid work, had little discretion in how they could do the work. But the study showed that the interactions with the clients these people had actually helped them to compensate for these poor task characteristics and still construct and maintain an expert identity as an accounting professional. So also that compensating role of social characteristics. Then, as I said, there is less research reversing the perspective, so looking at the impact of identity on work design, but there is a couple that actually show that people's identities function as a filter in how we perceive work characteristics and the relative importance to us. The first example has to do with entrepreneurial identity. So we have two studies here. The first one shows that small business owners who identify as entrepreneurs actually view high task variety, but also including doing secondary tasks, like, for example, marketing or administration, more in a positive way as a challenge, whereas the small business owners who didn't really perceive themselves to be entrepreneurs necessarily saw these administrative tasks and marketing tasks more as a hindrance demand, so something that takes energy from them. Similarly, we found that, or the study by Feng et al. Showed that entrepreneurs were more likely, or former entrepreneurs were more likely to leave, to voluntarily leave paid employment, but that this was actually moderated by good work design. So when they had high job complexity and more opportunities to start new projects, this was in line with their what we call lingering identity, so their identity as a former entrepreneur, and this actually motivated them to stay longer in this paid employment. So the value of job characteristics is also determined by the identities you carry. A second example has to do with the salience, so the importance of non-work identity, where we see that workers who also highly value their non-work identity and perceive conflicts between their work identities and their identities outside of work actually attach more importance to work characteristics that can help mitigate, so resolve such conflicts, such as scheduling autonomy, for example, or supervisor support. So here we see that it also works the other way around. Now, what this actually shows, or if I look at the whole chapter, we see the importance of work identity alignment. And this reflects a little bit what Chia-Huei and Lina said before about the correspondence between work and personality. Well, we also see that work characteristics and work identity, or identity more broadly, are seen as two sides of the same coin, and people strive towards alignment between these two elements. When there is misalignment between the work characteristics and people's identity, it is likely to become a problem. One problem that we see occurring in the literature is identity threat. So people feel attacked in their identity. They feel that they're not valued or respected in the sense that they view themselves. And this can trigger negative outcomes, including stress, burnout, increasing turnover in tensions, and increasing absenteeism. An example of this we can find in, for example, the study of Mattarelli and Tagliaventi. They studied how Italian companies offshored their part of their IT work to IT professionals in India and Turkey. And we see that these IT professionals actually experience this identity threat because whereas they expect to do knowledge-intensive and innovative work, they're often assigned to more routine and simple tasks, creating a lack of ownership and really an erosion of that professional identity as IT professionals. Now, what is also interesting here, and again, I'm linking this to what Lina said, is that people are not just passively subjected to the work design they have. We also know they have agency, and we see this agency in job crafting. So what was interesting in this example of these offshore IT professionals was that even though they struggled and they felt this lack of ownership and this identity threat, they didn't stay passive under it. So what we saw that they did was actually engage in two types of job crafting. First, individual job crafting, so trying to get more involved in the actual design of the software by interacting more with the Italian employees at the headquarters, searching proactively for more direct contact with clients. Again, we see that compensatory role of social characteristics, and they try to increase their autonomy. At a collective level, we also saw job crafting. So these offshore IT professionals would come together to engage in shared problem solving. They would seek support from each other also, and they would proactively increase what we call challenging demands. So make their jobs a bit more challenging in a way that is energizing by, for example, organizing trainings or exploring new business ideas. And in this way, by engaging in this individual and collective job crafting, they actually succeeded in improving that alignment, and this has positive consequences. So to briefly sum up some of the key takeaways in relation to the questions we asked. So the first question was, does work design shape identity or vice versa? The answer is both, but we know more about work design shaping identity, mainly because that is more studied. Which work characteristics are most important? That's difficult to say. Again, we are influenced by what is studied, but I would say it depends on the identity that is valued. For example, people with a very important non-work identity, you see that social relationships are more important. And for people who really prioritize their careers, they will look more for challenging demands like training or growth opportunities. And then, can we influence the relationship between work design and identity? Yes, as we saw in the last example, you can influence it. You can influence this top down, of course. As a manager, you can redesign work to be better aligned with your people's identity, but also as an employee, you can engage in job crafting. But I would say it's not always easy. It's not easy because, as we said, identity is fixed. So if you want to, or it's not fixed, but it's not easy to change. So if you want to influence identity with work design, it's going to take some time. And also if people feel threatened in their identity, there's not an easy fix. It's a complicated relationship in that way. Then some other points I wanted to highlight is that when it comes to work design and identity, it's really about that alignment. So can we design work that matches with workers' identity? Then we will see positive outcomes such as well-being and performance. Then there is also not one best way. So I cannot tell you how to design work in the best way related to identity, just because identity is complex and personal. So even in the same occupations, perceptions of work design may vary because people have differences in their preferred identities. And then finally, context matters. I think what is interesting based on this research is that some things you cannot control. For example, in aged care, you have regulations that can restrict autonomy, but there is oftentimes also elements that we can control, for example, the quality of relationships. And this gives us, both as managers and as employees, some freedom in how we align work design with our identity. And that was what I wanted to say. So I'll stop sharing now and give word back to you, Caroline.
Thank you, Chia-Huei. It's fascinating. I think I've learned so much, actually. I know I read the chapters, but you learn so much from just hearing you guys speak about it, which is and it totally brings it to life. There are a couple of questions in the chat I just actually want to bring up. First, it's about yours, Jivenny, just while we're on your topic. It was a question at the beginning, was more of a clarification question around what is the difference between roles and identities, like roles in work, and because they sort of what some of the examples were, like a volunteer or animal lover or a lecturer. But what is the difference between that and actually identity, or is there one?
Yeah, I would say there is one because roles are more structurally defined. So as a company, you can define a role, you can define a job, you can make a job description. Whereas with identity, you really have that personal perception. It's a story you tell yourself. So you can also highlight certain elements within the formal job description and neglect others. So they're not necessarily the same thing, but of course they're related. Of course, if you look at, for example, the accounting professionals, the accounting role will influence to some extent how you view yourself as an accounting professional due to the inherent tasks that are associated with that role.
Thanks, Jivenny. And there was another question from David. It was asking whether the ultimate tool for alignment selection is self and employer.
To be self-employed?
I'm not sure. David, maybe if you want to speak up and clarify what your question is. If you're still there. It's just in the chat. It was about
David cannot unmute.
Oh, he can't unmute. Yeah, he just said it's the ultimate tool for, or maybe write in the chat what you mean, the ultimate tool for alignment selection. Maybe it's the alignment between the identity and work is actually between self and employer. But I might be paraphrasing badly. Maybe while David is chatting.
I mean, I'm not sure if that's what he means, but the interesting thing about being self-employed is that you have it's self-choice or employers. Wait, David is saying something.
Or the employer
self-choice or the employer selection process. I think it's both. I mean, depending on which identity is important to you, you will select jobs that allow you to enact that identity. So if your career is very important to you and you want to make steps, you will choose a job that allows you to grow fast and have all of these training opportunities. But at the same time, I can also imagine that there's also selection happening. How you design jobs as a company, as a manager even, attract certain people. And you want to, for example, if you give a lot of autonomy, you probably are attracting proactive people, because if people are not proactive and they're put in a job with a lot of autonomy where they need to make a lot of decisions themselves, it's not going to work. So also there I see two sides.
Excellent. Thank you, Jivenny. And I'll just switch now to Chia-Huei and Lina. There's a question right from the start, actually, when you started your presentation, Chia-Huei, around whether it's a chicken and egg question. So do roles that have extroverted role requirements shape personality, or do they attract extroverts? And I think you touched on that.
Yes, I'm actually typing my response to that, but I haven't sent it yet. Yeah, but so this is really good because I really want to answer these questions. I think this question is really depending on whose perspective we are taking. I think from the organizational perspective, it's definitely creating, right? Because usually organization creates the job based on their need, their purpose, and they hope this job can attract the people they have those competencies to join the organization. So I can see that from the employer's organizational perspective, then we were more thinking about like a role creation rather than a selection, because we use the creation as a way to select people we want. But then for the employee's perspective, then we actually can have both, right? Because we all talk about like job crafting, and then we can see from the individual interests, then maybe sometimes we want to have the role that we haven't tried before, and this is the crafting for interests. But at the same time, we also can see some people, they are more comfortable to do the things they are good at. And then we can say some people, they may probably just thinking about the role is more about the selection for their own strength. Yeah. So therefore, this is for individual. I can see that they can have two mentalities about how they want to enter the role. Either that is for creating something new for them, or is more about like whether they want to be be good at something and they choose the environment that allow them to shine. Yeah, so I think that it's really about whose perspective we are talking about here. So I don't see that's either or. I see it's actually both. Yeah, because
Yeah.
at a different time, people may have a different mentality to choose what they want to work.
That's quite a complex thing, which is fascinating. There's actually another question for you, Chia-Huei and Lina. Is there evidence suggesting correlation between age and direction of influence, i.e., personality shapes your job identity or job identity shapes personality? So yeah, with age in there as a moderator. Have you done any research on that or read anything?
Yeah, so far I didn't see any studies which they focus on the aging, how the aging factors can contribute to the personality change. But then we do actually see people still change their personality traits in the late life periods. Yeah, so I think that's exciting. It's like very hopeful findings from my point of view. The finding shows that the people actually become more agreeable when they're getting older. So
Yeah.
which is a nice is a nice finding to have, right? Sort of that the people become more comfortable with the environment they are living, and then people when they are getting older, they feel like, okay, the world is all my friends now. I don't have lots of enemies in my life. So I think this is a really nice trajectory for people change their personality when they are aging. But then if we think about how the jobs can play a role during this aging workforce, then I think that's the big questions that we can ask. Yeah, and then I think there are more interesting questions we definitely need to explore. Yeah, so far there is no, as I mentioned, there is no evidence that I can say much, but I think that is something that we will start to observe, right? Because now the older countries have this aging workforce a phenomena, and then we probably will start to see a more and more new phenomena that we don't have the opportunity to explore before. Yeah, Lena, do you have any comments on this?
Yeah, not specifically on age, but maybe I'll just add quickly that I think there's some studies that probably considers more life stages instead of or significant life events instead of specific age, because these days people do different things that are completely contradictory to what we traditionally think what younger people do, what older people do. So it's often that your choice, your vocational choice, or something significant happening, for instance, entering into a completely new career or starting your own business, or, being made redundant or early retirement. So those kind of things happening in your life probably have a more major impact on us in strictly compared to age specific, the trajectories.
And I was just reflecting as you two were talking then, thinking that as we get older, often I think, obviously I'm not at the stage yet myself, but what I hear from people who are older is that you've met those challenges of kind of potentially getting to, a career point that you wanted. You've had children, you've got a bit more stability, you've got some money, you got a house, and those things sort of mean that you become a bit more mellow. So it's interesting, the environment, how that could shape aging too. And just to flag that we do have a chapter on aging in the book, so you might find some interesting snippets in there too. But that's actually a nice segue when you're talking about identity and talk about retirement, Lena. There was a question I think that Jivenny, maybe you can answer here. It says, have you done any work on changing identity after retirement? Like if work has been a big part of someone's identity, no longer work. And I think it's also possibly the case, for people who are like elite athletes and things, when you suddenly stop doing what you love and what you identify with, and have to change identity, it can be super hard for people. Do you have any thoughts about that one, Jivenny?
Yeah, so I haven't personally done any research on retirement. I do know there are studies, for example, on military soldiers who get injured during combat and then need to, they can no longer do the actual physical work of the military occupation. And what you see in these people is that they're going to kind of both adapt their identities by emphasizing certain elements of it that are become more important. For example, they still see themselves as people who want to serve others, but then now they are going to do that through volunteering. And for example, they would see themselves as very disciplined people, organized people, and they would use that part of themselves in that volunteering role. So you can see that transfer of identity elements. It's not a whole identity, but some elements can be transferred into what is still possible for these people after those injuries. Another thing I had to think about, so I'm studying the impact of automation on train drivers, and Caroline, you know this. But here I saw that actually people who are older, so closer to retirement, actually struggled less with this technology, with this automation, because they could kind of store that identity also in the past. So they said, I've been a train driver all my life. I've seen everything there is to know and to see about this job. I've had it, and they cherish it as a past identity, but they can actually also store it. So it doesn't really bother them anymore that they cannot do these things anymore. And what you see again is they shift their attention to other things that now become more important in their identity, which are more non-work related. It's more about these social aspects, about this quality of relationships. They will try to work with people that they just think are cool people, are nice people to work with, and try to exchange more about their lives outside of work. And so this is really interesting with age, that in a way they're actually more adaptable, whereas people sometimes stereotypically think they're not, that in this case they were.
Yeah, that is fascinating actually, because I've only really heard that story sort of around where people really can't identify, or well, yeah, when you lose the job, you lose it unless you have a lot of other interests. It can be very difficult to fill it. It's a bit like when children leave the home, and it can be very difficult. And what do I do with all this time? So anyway, that's fascinating, and I see comments in the chat there to also think that's fascinating. I think I would just like to jump to a question maybe that was answered in the that was asked in the list of questions when people registered. There's one that I thought was quite interesting. I'm not sure if any of you have come across this, but what is the most innovative work design initiative you've seen which fosters either positive work identity or personality? So that's one for anyone, any of you there. Is there a work design initiative that's really been positive? I guess it kind of is sort of saying that positive work design fosters positive personality, but maybe there's something more specific.
Yeah, I can say something about this because I don't see that the organization they do the job design simply for the personality change purpose. They actually don't think in that way. The reason is because the organization they tend to use the job design as a tool to boost motivation and performance. And to me, I think this is actually aligned very well with the personality change directions because by doing a good design to supporting the employees and boosting their motivation and performance, it's actually the short-term gain, but then you also have a long-term gain as well because by doing that, people will start to drive their personality towards more agent people and more proactive and more having higher level of control and also boost their self-efficacy as well. So I I I think that's the chapter that we want to deliver is that the at a practical level, the job design still do its own purpose to facilitate the performance and the driving motivation. But then we want the organization to recognize by doing this, they also have a long-term game. They also have a responsibility because doing this will also help the employees to develop their personality in a positive directions. So this is why I said organizations don't see that work design as a way to change personality, but they actually have a different purpose, but they achieve the same goal.
Yeah.
And I also have a really interesting questions from the other person in different settings. They ask, what happens if the organization says that I want to do the job change because I want to change your personality? Whether that would be so intimidating and whether that is ethical when organization trying to say that, right? So I think this is also a really nice conversation about, okay, what's the main purpose of the organization, what they want to do, and what's the acceptance that the employees will be happy to hear, whether the job change is mainly for their performance or the fundamental their personality in the long term. Yeah.
And I think that's super interesting because it also raises those questions around what actually is a good personality. You know, there's benefits and minuses to all sorts of personalities, and different job roles require different personalities. So even what are we trying to shape people towards? It's fascinating. Thank you, Chia-Huei. Yeah, do any of you others have comments? Or there's a couple of things in the chat actually. Yes, it's thinking about how work design influences team identity, even.
Yeah, it can
Um,
definitely influence more collective. I think we often focus on individual. I mean, no, it's not really. In the research, we focus on organizational identity, so identifying with your organization or occupation. But of course, you have identity at different levels. You have very personal identities, you have team identities. Unfortunately, less studied. I didn't, there's no specific research that comes to mind in the chapter. But again, yeah, of course you can look at aligning work design with what is a team identity, but then the first question is, what is your team identity? Is it something that you want to establish proactively? Then it can be a design in itself, like it can be an exercise as a team or and as a manager. What kind of team do we want to develop, or do you already have an established team? Then it's more about identifying what is the shared identity of this team, and is this something we want to support even more, or is it something that we want to change? For example, when the team identity is really not that strong or not that valued also, because that's two things, right? Is what does it mean to be a member of this team, but also to what extent is this important to me? For example, in my school, I can identify with my department, or I can identify with my school, but I identify more with my department than with my school because of different reasons that all of these levels play out. And I think one of the questions was about how can we kind of more scale work design. Well, if you want to scale work design, it pays off more to look at identities at a more collective level, because this can be scaled, whereas personal identities, yeah, that's difficult. Then you need to start making ideals or specific work designs for each person. You can do that with job crafting, but then that can generate conflicts with more collective identities as well.
That's fascinating because it brings me back to thinking about like within my work, I guess, our own department, and perhaps many people have had this experience where your whole department sort of sits down and tries to create what is it that we stand for? You know, what is our identity as a department or a unit? And you have these things every now and then. And you're right, it can shape kind of your behaviors and then how you react and be potentially your internalize that process. It's fascinating. So we only have 2 minutes left. So we are nearing the end of the webinar. Thank you everyone for joining us online. Does anyone have another quick question they would like to ask in the last 2 minutes? Or do each of you maybe want to say one key takeaway, one thing that you think you want to stay with everybody? I'm just putting you in the spot there.
I would say alignment, because I saw it in both of our presentations, whether it's between personality and work design or identity. I think just paying attention to this alignment and understanding that if you change something also in work design, that you can disrupt that alignment, that's also important to be aware of.
Thank you, Giovanni. Alignment, definitely, I agree with that one. Chia-Huei, anything
Yeah,
from
I
you?
think, I think that the highlight for me is really about how we think about work. What's the meaning of work to our life? I think that is the bigger conversation that we bring up today, right? And in the past, I don't think, for example, if I think my parents' generation, they don't think this a lot, right? Because they just go for work, right? But nowadays, because of flexible working, because we experience this COVID, and then sort of that we start asking ourselves, what's the meaning of work to our life? And then we start to bring up a list, okay, how's the work influence our identity? How's the work influence our personality development over time? Yeah, so I think this is kind of like the new era of the human life, thinking about like work is not something that you just do it and take it for granted, right? You actually start to think, what's the meaning of work? And then when you have this question, then you start to ask lots of questions such as why I want to this job, why I want to work in this space, and what's the meaning of office, and what's the meaning of my coworkers. That more questions to ask. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chia-Huei. And 30 seconds, Lena, and something from you.
Oh, 30 seconds. For me, I think it's that a agency we can always bring in to changing who we are, whether it's personality or identity. Is lots of people these days actually very active in pursuing that personal development, and I think that's a very good thing to do. If we always bring that back onto what do I want to achieve and how can I get there. And often we do if we have that clear goal and we know what to do and follow our plans gradually. So everything is possible.
That's great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our three presenters. That's amazing. We are out of time now. Be great to have all the chat online and the engagements. It's been delighted to meet with you all. But thank you very much. We do need to end this one, but come to the next one in April. I will see you again, hopefully. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye.
See you. Bye bye. Thank you, Caroline and Lena and Troy.